Right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Richard. My voice is a bit croaky today, so I'm kind of hopefully a cold is behind me, but my voice hasn't quite caught up. So where are we? We are at episode 95. It's Friday, the 28th of June of 2024, and we've got three really interesting themes today, which you'll see on the slide, which are innovation, sustainability, and training. So here's me, and lovely to see you as always. So let me quickly take you through the panel that we have lined up for today, as it's a really great panel, as always, as you'd expect. So my co-host today is Rosemary Nunn. Let me just spotlight her for you. So here's Rosemary. She's going to be co-hosting. Because I haven't got much voice, she's going to be introducing our two presenters, John and Alastair. So so we will then move to John, who we'll hear a bit later, involved in politics, I think is the best way to describe it. Very good key politic observer. I think your presentation today, John, is going to be absolutely fascinating, given what's going on, not just here, but on the other side of the pond. So welcome, John. And then John will be followed by Alastair and Alastair Beddow. And think of you, those of you who were on the show last month, will know that he gave us a really fascinating summary of the strategy and marketing research panel, and who's now come back for the second helpings because we didn't cover everything. We're looking much more at the themes on this occasion. And then last, but by absolutely no means least, I'd like to bring in Zoe Bailey. And Zoe is the head of operations, I think is the technical term, head of strategic operations. Sorry, I've got that right now, at Withers and Rogers. And it's lovely not just to have Lord Accountancy. So welcome, Zoe, and she'll be joining us for the panel session after the two presentations. Before we invite Rosemary to introduce our first presenter, just like to run through some forum news. I'll switch back to me. Okay, fine, super. So what's going on? There's quite a lot going on, I suppose, is the simple answer to that. First of all, if you're not watching the excuse me, if you're not watching the videos from the past shows, you're missing out because lots of people are. Second one, I just wanted to tell you that we're going to be organizing Professional Services Management Excellence Awards in March of next year. Well, that's when the ceremony is. And it's interesting because the last in-person ceremony we had was in March 2020, when we had the storm clouds called the pandemic, or it's COVID, I think at that stage, just kind of hovering. So 5 years on, hopefully we'll be back with a great ceremony in person at the same venue, the London Marriott. So there you go, 26th of March. Next one I wanted to mention is on the skills development platform, which I've mentioned on a few of these talks. We're introducing groups in the next week or two, and what they're sort of based on what you might find on, say, LinkedIn or Facebook, same more or less same functionality, but we've got an equal emphasis on posts and content. And I think what's going to be really good for what I call the enterprising members is they'll be able to create their own private or open groups, invite people in, and then manage posts or content submitted by members. So really great opportunity for people to do interesting things. And it doesn't have to be around professional management. If you want to create a group to cover F1 motor racing, that's absolutely fine as well. I really don't mind. The other thing we're going to be doing on the platform is we're going to be adding in a job board. And unlike most job boards, this is actually going to be pre-populated with all the jobs found on firm websites by specialist publishers of vacancy soft. For example, there are about 1,500 marketing jobs published annually by UK law firms. They'll all be up there. So it'll be a really interesting, great place to go and find out what's going on. And then lastly, we're quite busy at the moment. We have just launched, or we're forming a finance and operations research panel, and we're looking forward to that panel coming back to a future show with its findings. So there you go. I think at that stage, it's probably about enough from me. So I will now, if I may, hand over to Rosemary, who's going to introduce our first presenter. Over to you, Rosemary.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. Good morning, everybody. As Richard highlighted, and with pleasure to have John Rowland with us this morning from Cicero Partners. He's the senior partner and the UK lead, and I think we are about to hear some amazing insights from this award-winning public affairs advisor into the political landscape. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Rosemary, your checks in the post. So this time next week, we will know what it looks like. One or two results might still be coming in, but the picture will be very, very clear by that point. So just remember, next Thursday, vote. You will need your ID. It's now compulsory. You need photo ID to vote. If you don't have it, you won't be allowed to vote. So just remember that. Public service announcement. So let's talk about the polls, because that's really what there is to talk about at this point in the campaign. The die, to some degree, is already cast, because about 25% of people vote on postal ballot now, including, I'm sure, many of the people on this call, which means that people will be voting already. And then the remainder of the votes will come in on the day. So what are the polls looking like? Well, I think early on in the campaign, one of the things me and my colleagues were saying is, well, look, this actually doesn't look like it's moving very much. Things were happening in the campaign, but the numbers weren't moving, which is unusual in campaigns. You usually expect something to happen that will move the balance in one direction or another. And certainly Rishi Sunak's working assumption was that he would be able to close the gap over the course of the campaign. That's generally what happens. But actually, the opposite has happened. So where and how have the polls moved? Let's look at the headline numbers. So this is a polling average that Politico update pretty much every day. Labour 42 points, Conservatives 20 points, Reform 17 points, Lib Dems 12, Green 6, SNP 3. What's happened over the course of the campaign is that the Reform vote share has increased by 5 or more points, which is substantial. And then the Tories have been the main, have basically been punished by that. But the Labour vote share has also slipped a little bit, down by about 3 points. Okay, well, that's fine. That's very interesting. Reform are up, the Tories are down. What does that mean in terms of seats? Well, you'll have heard increasing discussion of this idea of a Tory apocalypse, an apocalypse in the blue wall at this election. And the reason that's being talked about is because of these more modern polls, which are known as MRP polls, multiple regression with post-stratification polls, which take the headline numbers, but what they do is they map them into a statistical model that creates a projection of the electoral geography of the UK on a constituency by constituency basis. So this allows you to drill down and say, well, this is what we expect, how we expect a particular constituency to behave, rather than saying, this is the vote share that that the party got, and based on the results last time, this is what we think they'll get this time. So it's a more sophisticated way of looking at it. And YouGov have been doing these, Ipsos has been doing them, and these are coming out with numbers of around 425 to 470 seats for Labour. There's only 650 seats in the whole of Parliament. So this is an enormous triple figure majority for Labour. But the more interesting or more worrying point for the Tories is that's leaving them on somewhere around 75 seats. Now, if you think in 2019, Boris Johnson had a majority of 80 and well over 300 seats, they're coming down to, like, say, 75, maybe 100 under some of these projections. The more traditional projections based on those polling numbers are putting the Tories on 190, which is a very, very different result. So I think the thing I would caution is the same input numbers are giving quite widely different projections on the outcome. And truthfully, we don't know what it's going to be. And we had Professor John Curtis in last week, and the point he makes is these MRP polls, these modern polls, are actually very sensitive to quite small changes. So if the Tories are up 3 or 4 points, where they end up being 3 or 4 points above where they are now, and Labour may be below 40, the results start to look quite different, because there are seats which look very under threat from Labour or the Lib Dems now that actually aren't in the end. So that's a very long way of saying that it is almost inconceivable that we'll have anything other than a healthy Labour majority. But the part of the puzzle that we're not clear on is just how many seats the Tories will have after all of that, because it could range from 190, which is a serviceable opposition, right down to 65, 70, which is cataclysmic. That means that they're losing seats in places you wouldn't think it was imaginable for the Tories to lose seats. Okay, fine, that's all the polling, but we will know. We will know this time next week. I just want to briefly talk about what will happen afterwards, because this is the first potential change in government for 14 years. So it will feel different. It will be different. Keir Starmer will go to the palace. He'll ask to form a government. And then over the course of that day, we will get the formation of the new government. And that will mean he'll name his key secretaries of state, the Chancellor, who will be Rachel Reeves. And then over the next few days, you'll start to get the sort of drip of ministerial announcements. And then the first few weeks of July are really busy. The King's speech will happen, I think it's the 17th of July, which is the moment at which the government will announce its legislative agenda. Right on the heels of that, there will be a European Political Community Summit in London. So that'll be the first time the UK is hosting that. That was the Macron idea of creating a new political community. That will be hosted in London. And then some point in July, they will go, probably 8 July or early August, they'll go on their summer holidays. But unlike most summer recesses, the politics won't go away, because Labour will be very keen to be making announcements through its first 100 days. Could anything change in the last week? Could anything change in the last week? What could move the numbers? Well, Reform have had some bad new press over the last few days. I mean, you can debate about whether Farage's comments on Ukraine are significantly damaging to the Reform support base. I think what is potentially more damaging is just their candidate quality is extremely poor. And they have got individuals who, you know, are being linked with all sorts of things. And I think that could hurt Reform in the final run down. And then there's also the kind of black swan, which is there some huge personal scandal in Keir Starmer's private life that we don't know about? Has he got another family somewhere? It's that kind of like strange thing that nobody knows about. If that were to blow over this weekend, then that could change it. Maybe not by enough to change the outcome, but, you know, politics has been quite strange over the last few years. So don't rule out anything like very strange happening in the last week. Just before I knock it on the head, Richard did mention the US presidential debate. I was in DC a couple of weeks ago, and you know, DC has got such a sophisticated market for political analysis. And I was talking to people that they do this all day long. Who do you think is going to win? And they just don't know. They don't know who's going to win. But the one thing that all of them were talking about was the question of Biden's fitness to stand for office. And I don't mean fitness in terms of a moral fitness, his physical fitness to stand for office. The Wall Street Journal had just done a big piece on Biden's infirmity and the extent to which it had been hidden. And then the debate happened last night, and suddenly the whole tone of that discussion has changed, because they're now saying, now there's a discussion within the US about whether Biden is going to be the candidate. Sorry, my son is playing outside. As to whether Biden is the right man to be the candidate, and whether at the convention or before he stands to one side and there's a new candidate, which throws the race open in a completely new way. So interesting times, and I haven't even talked about what's going on in France, which is another discussion. But I think I've spoken for long enough, and I will leave it there, Rosemary.
Lovely. Thank you so much, John. I think, as ever, that's really, really fascinating. And I think we're going to wait with bated breath to see what happens in the next week. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Alastair Beddow. Alastair is with us today. He's Managing Director for Meridian West, and he is an advisor on the strategic and commercial issues impacting the financial and professional services sector. And he's going to share with us today the results of the biannual tracker. So over to you, Alastair.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosemary. And those of you who were on the Retuning Your Firm call last month will have seen the first half of this presentation. There was kind of so much to cover that we had to have a reprise. So I'm just going to share with you, if this will work. Some slides. So here we go. So just a quick reminder before we dive in that this is the findings of the latest strategy and marketing tracker. So we have CMOs and strategy leads for a range of professional firms on the panel. giving us insights around what's up top of their agenda. The research was undertaken during May. And last time I gave you some of the headlines around the kind of broad market trends. What I'm going to do now is dive into some of the themes that we didn't have a chance to cover last month. So let's have a quick look to start with on some of the headlines thematically. So there's three areas that I'm going to talk about briefly today. So one is innovation. And I think across all of these three headlines, we're seeing some interesting tensions emerge. So in the innovation sphere, what we're seeing is that half of those who responded identify their firm as having a strong culture of innovation. But actually, when we asked about some of the kind of infrastructure, innovation kind of building blocks, if you like, that support that culture, many reported, or a lot fewer reported having those in place today. So I think a tension there between, the firm having a broad culture of innovation, but actually, is it really investing in the right things to make that happen? Our second theme was around learning. And again, I think a kind of tension here that many firms are prioritizing learning. They're looking at kind of informal ways to support learning and development across the firm. But when asked whether that was an integral part of how they actually measured the firm's overall performance, only a third said that that was today. So again, a kind of recognition there that learning is important, but actually, is it feeding into how we measure the overall performance of the firm? And then the third big theme was around sustainability. And again, I think some interesting tensions emerging here. Firms investing and committed to ideas of social mobility, well-being, etc. But actually, when we drill down into that and whether people are factoring in sustainability criteria into things like client selection, things like talent recruitment, or even performance management, far fewer are actually doing that today. So some headlines there, and I'll take you through some numbers that support that in a moment. Just a quick recap on what we explored in May, first of all. So you may remember, if you're on the May call, that in the tracker survey, we asked about 4 themes. So there's 3 that I just mentioned: innovation, sustainability, and training, as well as AI. We did a deep dive into AI in May. So if you missed that, do go back and rewatch that video. But across each of these 4 themes, the respondents to the tracker were asked a range of questions. First off, how important that was for their growth strategy. And you can see there the numbers suggesting that in most cases, these things are integral, not just to good business practice, but actually to firm growth. AI is slightly behind there, but that's obviously something which has been really accelerating in recent months. We then asked to what extent firms say that their clients expect them to deploy this in their interactions. And again, large percentages here, close to or upwards of 90% across the board. Apart from AI, we're only seeing about half at the moment. See that as an expectation. And then an interesting piece around productivity. So again, AI, innovation, training, big drivers of firm productivity. We also asked the strategy and marketing leaders themselves around their own role for them in their function in leading or supporting these agendas. So first off, we asked about to what extent they had a market leading approach, or they thought they did. And again, I think some interesting pieces here. Most of these averages hitting somewhere between the kind of 4.5 to 6 on a 10-point scale. So to me, suggesting that firms see themselves probably somewhere amongst the pack, not leading, not falling behind, but very much kind of in the middle somewhere. And then, as I said, we asked people about to what extent they are either collaborating or leading as marketing and strategy leads on these various agendas in their firm. And again, for the most part, a majority are actively involved across AI, innovation, sustainability, and training. But you can see sustainability is the one where we've got the biggest proportion, around a quarter, saying that they actually lead that agenda as CMOs or strategy leads. So let's take a bit of a deeper dive into those 3 themes in the time that we've got. So this will be a quick canter through, but we can, I think, reflect on some of these with our other panelists today as well. So first up, innovation. So as I said, we can see here that in terms of where firms are at today, just under half think that they or feel like they've got a strong culture of innovation. It's something that's kind of brought up in client conversations. But when we dig down, we look further down this chart, you can see that the numbers start to drop. So having things like clear budgets for innovation, documented innovation strategies, etc., the numbers are really dropping here to less than a third. So again, what that suggests to me is that the intent there, but is that backed up with a clear organizational infrastructure to deliver? We also ask people not just what they've got in place today, but what they're also likely to implement in future. And I thought what was quite interesting here is if we look at the very bottom of the chart, innovation practices that enable existing knowledge to be accessed, really big focus on that for the rest of the year, the next 6 months. Again, I think an interesting one, for professional services being such knowledge-focused businesses, that really looking at the innovation agenda to support that. If we move on to training then, as I said, I think what's interesting here is that for around 3/4, informal learning is a big part of their overall learning ecosystem. It's something that they say is encouraged and recognised, as well and as alongside formal learning. If we look at some of these other areas, you'll see things like data and analytics. Actually, very few at the moment are doing that in relation to their learning agenda. So actually, incorporating an understanding of the impact, who's getting involved, measuring that outcome. But if we switch and have a look at the focus for the rest of the year, you can see again at the bottom of the chart that that's an area that we're expecting, or respondents expect to be spending more time and attention throughout the rest of the year. I think on this broad idea of measuring firm performance through the lens of training and development, again, we can see that's an interesting area where we're seeing a bit of an uptick in perhaps thinking through ways that could be incorporated into, for example, an overall balanced scorecard on firm performance, 20%, saying that's something that they're looking at for the rest of this year. And then if I switch tack to sustainability, again, you can see here a real big focus at the top. All of those respondents who actually took part say that their firm's got health and wellbeing programs in place today. Many, around 80%, have got projects where they're supporting local community initiatives, social mobility, apprenticeships. I think these things have been fairly common practice for quite a while now. Firms, really being seen to be good employers that have a great impact, not just on their employees, but the wider community and stakeholders that they engage with. Pro bono work common, 2/3 say that they're doing that at the moment. Measuring carbon footprint, over 70% doing that as well. If we then switch and have a look at where firms are focusing for the rest of the year, again, I think some interesting numbers here. One certainly is around sustainability reporting. So those that aren't doing that today, big focus on getting better and smarter at kind of reporting on that. I think that's largely driven by procurement processes, clients, or professional firms expecting to see more there as part of pitches and bid processes. But also looking at sustainability around things like client listening, involving that in conversations with clients, and more starting to look at it as a criteria to assess client fit, thinking about it in the context of performance appraisals or talent acquisition and development. So lots of interesting things emerging from our tracker. That's just a quick canter through, but I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to hear the panelists reflect on that as I hand back to Rosemary.
Lovely, thank you very much. That's a great set of insights there on what's going on in some of the key things for the firms that we're surveying. I think we're going to go now to just get some opinion from the panel on what they see about these things. Does anyone have anything they'd like to start by sharing, or like pose a question, Richard?
Yeah, I think it's always good if you pose a question. I mean, I'd like to obviously welcome Zoe properly into the group. So maybe we'll ask her to ask a first question, which is, as head of strategic operations, where does innovation fit into that agenda?
Hi, thanks, Richard. Innovation. We have been doing quite a bit more recently around innovation, and particularly with regards to AI, because I think we recognise that if we don't do something, we're likely to get left behind. This is a fast pace and fast moving part of business. So we've been fairly early adopters of Copilot and are using that within the business. But in terms of other AI, we have looked at, I would say, over 20 different types of AI to try to understand, could that help us? How might that help us? And I think without understanding what our problem is, without understanding what we need to do as a business and what we need to address, we're just going to keep looking at potential tools and not knowing how they're actually going to be able to fit in the business. So I think we need to understand properly where we need AI to help us in the future, and then look for a solution that might be able to deliver that for us.
Thank you, Zoe. I think one of the things that I've observed, and I think it's come out in some of the trackers, is around the fact that the application of AI needs people to have their data in order. And I think we've talked about this for quite some time, haven't we? Going back, years. And I think it's still the case that quite a lot of organisations still haven't got that data in a structure that enables them to deploy those advanced technologies. Does anybody sort of see that picture? Alastair, have you picked that up from the trackers, or Zoe, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with that. Certainly, in terms of the challenges is often around being able to bring together quite siloed sources of insight and data around, the internal business performance, and being able to link that with data around, clients and the wider market. I think that's historically been a challenge. I think the technology solutions that are out there, and many are AI enabled, make that easier. But I think I think, as Zoe was saying, it's really about understanding what questions you want to answer with that approach. So the data, sorry, the AI or the tools will help you with the data crunching, but it's really to what end you're putting that, I think is where the thinking needs to go.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of the data point. We're an IP firm. So actually what we do in terms of patents, designs, trademarks is very forecastable. We have, very specific deadlines that we meet in terms of the work that we do. Now, you would have thought, therefore, we should be able to do some quite clever things with forecasting around our business model. And yet it's taken us quite a lot of time to be able to use our case manager system to give us numbers that we can even start to think about this. We're working with a business at the moment and have posed this question as a challenge, as I said, and they are starting to explore AI. So perhaps together we might be able to come up with some sort of solution there. But I agree with Alastair, that data is needed, and you need to understand it to be able to then evaluate how it can help.
One of the sorry, just me. One of the, I think it was Alastair's first slide, where he was talking about how firms rated themselves vis-a-vis competitors, and rated themselves quite low on AI, on innovation. And in a way, that was what I think the message that came back was, yes, we have a culture of innovation. We think innovation is important, but we don't really have the process, I think Alastair called it, the infrastructure in place to make sure that right things happen. I mean, I'd really like to ask Rosemary here, and she's my co-host, but can you sort of explain the importance of that infrastructure in order for innovation to actually become a reality?
Yeah, so if you look at the value chain, so certainly when I've put these models in place for organisations, if you don't get the data mapping correct in the first instance, and somebody's mentioned sort of disparate systems and silos of data and understanding the question you want answered. But if you actually look at that as a value chain, it sort of starts with, where is the data? What is the data? What is the question you want answered? But why? So why are we bothering with all of this? And ultimately, these advanced technologies that we can deploy, and we talk a lot about AI, but other advanced technologies are available and also very useful. For example, RPA is another, robotic process automation is very interesting in its potential application in the professional services sector. But if you look at innovation in general, you know, it's about bringing something novel or something new. And then you have to question, you know, well, is it just about something novel or something new? And this is where the university sector becomes quite an interesting element of that journey, because everything in a university's research portfolio is about doing something novel. But actually translating that into the application into an organisation becomes the innovative point, especially if that's then novel and new for that organisation. And then you have to ask the organisation, why are you putting all this effort in that's going to need you to look at this massive data pool, to look at these systems, to look at these questions, really question yourself, you know, what is it you want to ask? Then it comes down to this classic question around productivity. And if you can take away what you call the small stuff from people, and you can drive that productivity around using these advanced technologies, conceptually, you can go up the value chain in terms of human interface with those technologies. And that's when you start to answer that age-old question for the UK, which is, why is our productivity sitting so low against other countries? You then translate that into the fact that we're now sitting and talking about the largest UK sector. You start to have impact. And I think it's understanding that entire value chain from beginning to end, and then looking at the disparate firms and organisations that that's applied across. You know, it's a challenging landscape. And I think the organisation, you know, like Zoe just highlighted, that manages to actually, you know, get a grip on this strategically and agree at the top level that this is strategically an important thing, is going to be in a really good position. That's how I see it. That's certainly the environment I've worked in the past.
Brilliant. John, if I could bring you in here. I mean, how important is that innovation concept in your day job, your world of political consultancy?
It's so that we are wrestling with. I would almost go as far as to say it's an existential question for us. Okay, so if I was starting, or we were starting our business tomorrow, would we build it how we built it now? And the answer is no. I would build a consultancy around a tech stack. Okay, you'd start with that. How do you build an agency or a consultancy that's technology enabled? And I work in a, you know, my agency is owned by a global multinational, and they are investing millions and millions of dollars into trying to develop that technology stack, which helps, you know, measure, helps us in process, but also helps measure what we're doing and show impact to our customers, because a lot of what the Havas does is actually advertising and media related. So constantly you're having to show what's the impact, what's the payback. So it's creating a system that allows you to not only be more efficient in your process, but to show and demonstrate value to your clients as well. So if I sort of zoom more in on my business, I think it also kind of means we have to ask some slightly searching and painful questions about the people that we're hiring as well. You know, traditionally PR and public affairs is based on very bright, hardworking associates and senior associates who might be in their 20s, you know, who are cranking work out with senior partners above them who win the business, provide the strategic advisory. But what if you're now saying, well, a load of the work that the juniors are doing, we're going to automate away in some way or another, or 20 or 30% of that work we're going to automate away? Where is the value? Like, so what is it that the clients are buying? Or are there services that we provide now that they're paying money for that they could in-house and use or AI to support them with? And it might not be as good, but it might be 80% as good. So for me, the innovation thing is, it's exciting, but it's also quite challenging as well, because we are thinking about, like, does our business model work if AI delivers on its promise, which is unclear at the moment, but if it does.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating point, John. And I think pre-2020, a lot of the talk around innovation and around sectors was around the word disruption. And actually, you don't hear that word quite as often now, because I think the whole world got disrupted, and so it got slightly diverted. But I think that concept around that change in the business model, that thinking around, if you started with a blank sheet of paper today, how do you actually design a business? And that concept that's very much come from sort of the construction and property world around digital twins. And if you built a digital twin for a professional services company, and I'm sure some of the larger organisations have done some of that work, Yeah, but how would that really look, and what would the impact be on learning and development, which is obviously a really key part of bringing, you know, new people forward? What would it be on workload? What, you know, would it change the service offering from the professional services firms? And so that disruption question, I think, is quite key. I mean, I'd be interested to hear Zoe's thoughts on that as a leader of strategy in the sector.
Yeah, I think sometimes innovation, it sounds big and it sounds a bit scary to businesses. And ultimately, you're talking about change, and then you're talking in a professional service firm about getting people's hearts and minds to buy into that change, and that can be challenging. I think sometimes a way of looking at innovation that can work is the fail fast, and ring fencing small amounts of risk that you're prepared to take, and really going for that, and saying, if we fail here, that's fine, because we're going to learn from that, and we might not, and then actually can scale up and roll that out effectively, efficiently across the business, and take people with us with a proven approach and method that works. So that's something that we are typically doing a little more of, because I think it helps with that. You know, innovation is quite a big, scary word.
John was mentioning that there's an impact on the junior members of the team, and a lot of the work that the more junior people, almost like their training area, if you like. And I remember years ago with what was then very high tech IBM Watson, and they were saying at that stage that they saw a situation where a lot of junior jobs were just not necessary. But where then do you get the experience and the expertise to become a senior, if that is indeed what the clients are looking for? Alastair, have you got any thoughts on that? Because I know your industry, market research, is as impacted as any other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting looking at the findings of the tracker as well, that, you know, that focus on innovation is actually kind of marrying into that knowledge area. You know, it's people kind of looking at how we can use these tools to, you know, to actually kind of accelerate maybe some of that learning and development. You know, to John's point, if the actual doing of work that you know, junior entry level kind of roles would have done is being more automated, how can we kind of speed up their knowledge and development to kind of have a greater impact on the more kind of strategic advisory area? Our business is no different from that. You know, we have to kind of adapt to lots of the kind of new tools and the AI, etc., that's coming on board. I think actually that's, you know, the right thing to do. I think it's a great opportunity. You know, to John's point, I think John mentioned, you know, when we look at recruitment, that's a big impact for us as well. When we're thinking about, you know, hiring analysts, hiring graduates, you know, it is that kind of skill set that we're looking for is changing, but also the ability to kind of adapt is something that's, you know, really important, because we know that even people who joined the business 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you know, the landscape is very different now, and it's going to be very different in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years again. So being, you know, we're looking for kind of aptitude, responsiveness, adaptability, as well as those kind of core skills, which we know are going to change.
The third theme for today was sustainability. And what was quite clear to me from looking at the research that was presented was that this was an area in which the people who responded to that tracker, strategy marketing people, were very involved in that area. And that could be because of the sort of CSR often being seen as a bit of greenwash in the past, and therefore the agenda staying with marketing. But there were certainly some issues around the client engagement aspects of sustainability, where people were looking to what, if you like, get involved. Now, I appreciate that innovation and training may be higher priorities, but if clients see the sustainability issue to be of importance, what are firms doing about that? Again, I'll perhaps ask John to give some thoughts on that in terms of his sector, and to what extent do clients see sustainability as an issue in terms of the way his firm relates with them, or is that not something that crops up on the agenda that much?
Sustainability is an interesting one, because there is so on the demand side, clearly when we are tendering for work now, there is an expectation that we will have a sustainability story, particularly when it's large firms procuring from us. But equally, as a large, you know, having a large listed French parent, there is an impact and sustainability program, right? So that includes decarbonisation, but it also includes access, allowing people to access the industry. So that would include going to kind of like people from different backgrounds. There is so it's important in the sense that it's a thing that our clients look for from us. But it's also a slightly strange thing as well, because in professional services, really, your carbon footprint is mostly electricity, it's travel, and it's paper. That's kind of it. And so we all have to do a survey every year about, are you using public transport? How do you get to the office? I think to a degree, the largest part of our impact in terms of carbon is based on where we're buying our electricity from. So it's important, but I don't know how I can say this, because I wonder, sometimes I wonder why firms are doing it, whether they're doing it because they really want to make a difference or because they feel they've just got to do it. And with a new government, this is actually, I guess, relevant to a new government. What will really put rocket boosters on it is that Labour will mandate the financial services industry, which is a big part of my client base, to deliver net zero transition plans, and they will be mandated and compulsory. So when that happens, I guess they'll be pushing harder into their supply chains as well in terms of scope 3 emissions. So it's a fact of life.
Zoe, if I may, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, but are you also looking to put in place a zero emissions plan for your business?
We try to be carbon neutral at the moment. Just following on what John said, I'm on the other side in that I do believe that all businesses have a responsibility to be responsible for the impact they have on our planet. And if we don't do that, I mean, we've probably left it too late anyway, let's be honest. But I think anything we can do now has got to be a good thing. What's interesting in terms of ESG and the efforts we've been making within our firm, we have been engaging with our people. We engage with our people on lots of things, but when we engage on either, we've done E and S now because we've already done quite a lot around work around governance, the contribution we have and the engagement we have is really high. So actually, I think this does matter to our people as well as our clients. And what was interesting in Alastair's survey actually, and in terms of the percentages, so yes, the tracker showed that firm development and sustainability is expected by clients 95%, and yet firms, only 43 of them believe it will lead to increased productivity. I thought that was quite an interesting dynamic there. And I do believe that when you have happy people who believe in what you're doing as a firm, they're more engaged. And when you've got engaged people, they'll go the extra mile, they'll do what's needed to help the business. And I think that does lead to increased productivity. So I was quite interested by that stat.
It's interesting.
Right. Well,
sorry,
I'm going to
sorry.
have to cut us off there because we're in the final minute, if I may. Sorry, John. I think we're going to have to continue this conversation next month. That's all I can say. Rosemary, firstly, thank you for being a great co-host. And I would like to thank Zoe, Alastair, and John. And I would like to invite all of you to give me the one idea that has come out from today that has been, oh, that was interesting, or has confirmed something that you thought might be the case. What's the one idea that's come out today from you, Rosemary?
Yeah, I think for me, actually, it was that final point that Zoe said about engagement. Happy people, engaged people, they do things for the firm that are positive. So really good. Okay,
Alastair, your final thought?
I think just that dynamic between actually professional firms being really great kind of organic innovators, but actually the need to perhaps put more structure, more process, more thought behind that in a more strategic way going forward.
John, you have a chance to answer back.
Yeah, very, very similar. I thought the discussion about innovation and the challenges, both Zoe and Alastair and Rosemary talking about that, I think is fascinating. And I genuinely think the application of technology is the biggest challenge we face as a firm. 100%.
And last word to Zoe.
Right at the beginning, John said with regards to the election, it will be different and it will feel different. And I wrote down how. And I think in terms of innovation, it's whatever happens in the next couple of weeks, how are we going to innovate? How are we going to respond to that as a business? How is it going to feel different for us as well?
Well, all I can suggest is that, as none of us have the answers, but that we will meet again in a month's time, some of us. I know John will be with us. And so hopefully we'll be able to hear John's thoughts on at least the political implications of whatever happens next week. But I know it will take some time for that change to roll out in full clarity. And I'd like to thank Zoe, Alastair and Rosemary for your contribution today. I know Alastair will be back later in the year for the next version of the Strategy and Marketing Tracker. But in the meantime, I wish you all fantastic summer break when you get there. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.